Good evening, everyone. It's so great to see your faces. Hello, I'm David Eglin, President of the Society for Contemporary Art, and we are most pleased to welcome all of you to our members' 2021 annual meeting. Tonight will be our second in a virtual format, and hopefully next year we'll all be together in person for our 2022 meeting. We very much appreciate that so many of you made the effort and signed up on Zoom to be with us here tonight, so thank you. I also want to thank Christie's for sponsoring tonight's annual meeting. Kathy Bush and Steve Zick have always been great partners, and we appreciate all their support. Now let's move on to tonight's agenda. After going over some housekeeping details and reviewing some of our SCA programming, I will turn the screen over to Jackie Bucksbaum, this year's Acquisition Chair, to review the Acquisition Committee's work this season. Jackie will then turn it over to the curators for a short presentation on each of our 5 acquisition finalists. We will have time for a few audience questions at the end of the curatorial presentations, and Jackie will review instructions on asking a question during her remarks. I will then come back on the screen to present next year's SCA's Board of Directors slate for 2021-22, and we'll wrap up the meeting with voting instructions. After the meeting, we encourage you to stick around, grab your custom Violet Hour cocktail or beverage of choice. There will be breakout rooms for 15 minutes following the event for our members to connect with one another and enjoy each other's company. Now for some housekeeping details. This presentation is being recorded. The SCA office will provide access to the presentation via email to SCA members later this week. To change the format you see on your screen right now, click the View button at the top of the screen and select your preferred layout. You may submit questions at the bottom of your screen via the chat function, which looks like a chat bubble. Simply type your message and click Enter. Questions can also be submitted by emailing info@scaic.org. Closed captioning is available by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen and selecting Show Subtitle. Now moving on to some of our programming highlights. Despite the challenges of the pandemic, our 2020-21 lecture series of artist talks and curator conversations was very robust. We actually achieved some of our strongest attendance levels ever through our virtual format. Our artist presentations and conversations included Fred Wilson, Najedka Akluni Crosby, Lynn Hirschman Leeson, Fahim Majid, Beverly Fishman, Charles Atlas, and Trevor Peglin. I'd like to thank Patty Sternberg, our dedicated programming chair, and her talented committee, shown here on this slide, for all their hard work with the curators on selecting this remarkable group of artists. Next, here's a sneak peek at some of our exciting upcoming lecture series. Member-only programming, as well as our 2022 lectures, will be announced soon. We also look forward to continuing with our SCA-sponsored Iterations Performance Series, welcoming Paulina Aloska in fall 2022. We'll share more details in the coming months. Moving on to the fundraising front, we were all very disappointed and a little nervous, to be perfectly frank, when we had to cancel our annual gala and auction at Crown Hall scheduled for May of 2020. But never fear, thanks to our benefit co-chairs, Michelle Holland and Andy Friedman, and their dedicated committee members, we held our most successful fundraiser ever in December with our SCA collector sale. This virtual kickoff and our online auction raised more funds than any previous benefit, live or virtual. We are grateful to everyone who attended and supported the SCA. Thank you to these individuals for their creativity in re-envisioning our biennial benefit and raising vital funds to support our mission. Both the success of the collector sale, along with the generosity of our members, allows us to make a double acquisition tonight, and also to fund the catalog of the upcoming Ikshang Adams exhibition. This funding, along with our previous commitments to the Iterations Performance Series and the Malagantana, the Stanley Brown, and the Barbara Kruger exhibitions, further demonstrate the SCA's commitment and support to the Art Institute of Chicago. In addition to our lecture series, we also held a number of member-only events, which included 2 distinct in-person COVID-appropriate gallery tours, one back in September and the second just a couple weeks ago in early June. In October, we hosted a virtual exhibition walkthrough of Malagantana, Mozambique Modern, and a curatorial discussion. We are so pleased that this walkthrough will be part of the upcoming digitally scholarly catalog. This spring, we organized a virtual conversation on the catalog Ray Johnson Care Of, with a lively discussion between the curators and world-renowned book designer Irma Boom, who joined us from Amsterdam. This summer, we are holding members-only small group tours of the Bisa Butler exhibition with curators Erica Warren, Melinda Watt, and Jordan Carter. And last, but certainly not least, we are proud to announce tonight that we'll be hosting an exclusive SCA members viewing of the Obama portraits, which are making Chicago and the Art Institute the first stop on their national tour. So there's no need to wait in line or obtain special tickets. On the evening of August 2nd, you'll be able to attend an after-hours viewing with other SCA members. Further details on this event will be forthcoming in your email, so please be on the lookout for this information. Thank you to Programming Chair Patty Sternberg and our Membership Chair McCall Stewart-Serta with her committee, especially Larry Antonatus, for creatively engaging our members these past months. We also had great partnerships for our lectures, events, membership communications, and biennial benefit. And we'd like to thank Christie's, Sotheby's, Prada, and Wright Auction, as well as many others who contributed to supporting the SCA during this challenging year. Now, I would like to introduce our acquisition chair, Jacqueline Buxbaum, for brief remarks before the curatorial presentations of the 5 finalists. This year marks Jackie's last year as acquisitions chair, which she has held for the past 3 years. She has done an incredible job leading this process, especially this past year with all the challenges of COVID. And I want to thank her for her outstanding leadership and commitment to the SCA. So thank you, Jackie, and please take it away.
Thank you, David. I'd like to thank the Acquisition Committee for their time, effort, and incredible commitment. Sorry, there's a little issue here. Hold on one second. Several aspects of our annual process were adjusted this year as we transitioned to meeting and reviewing artworks virtually. Fortunately, these changes also presented new opportunities. I am very pleased that this year the SCA's Acquisition Committee had a special focus on Chicago artists. This was interpreted in the broad sense: artists living and working in and around Chicago or having a strong relationship with the city's history and the communities. Wherever possible, we endeavored to work with local galleries representing these artists. Most importantly, this move was an effort to support our local artists and galleries, while also allowing the possibility for our process to still take place locally. We scheduled in-person viewings of the artworks in the final stages as we narrowed the considerations to the 5 finalists. We are very excited to present this robust focus on the artists that will be shown tonight. We are incredibly grateful to the curators and the numerous museum teams who worked extremely hard to install the 2021 SCA annual exhibition at the Art Institute of Chicago, despite the many challenges of this past year. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge this year's Acquisition Committee for their valuable contributions to this process. This year, our members were especially dedicated, working diligently and remaining flexible throughout the year. If you could, when I call your name, if you're on the screen, please raise your hand. Hedgie Choi Black, Michelle Holland, Sean Engel, Eric McKissick, George William Price, McCole Stewart-Serta, David Williams, and Ebony Gates. Thank you all again. It is through your dedication to the SCA, in addition to the curator's generous collaboration and guidance, that we are able to present these remarkable 5 finalists this evening. I'd like to give them a round of applause. Thank you, everyone. Now on to the voting instructions. Please listen carefully. This year, SCA members will be selecting 2 works to purchase for the Art Institute's permanent collection. When filling out your ballots, please remember that number 1 is your top choice and number 5 is your bottom choice. When ballots are being completed, you will also be asked whether you require a full or a half ballot. For those members who share an SCA membership, for example, a partner or a spouse, you both will have the option of voting by submitting a half vote for your shared membership. David will review the instructions for accessing this year's ballot at the end of the curatorial presentations. During the presentations, please feel free to submit your questions through the chat function at the bottom of your screen or by emailing the SCA office, as mentioned earlier by David. The curators will do their best to address as many questions as timing allows following the presentations. Our curatorial team will now present this year's 5 2021 acquisition finalists. We will start with Hendrik Volkerts presenting Candida Alvarez. Take it away.
Jackie, thank you so much. Applause to you as your final year as chair. We will miss you and thank you for all the work that you have done, but also thank you to all the committee members who've worked incredibly hard this year and under extraordinary circumstances. So I just want to echo that and say how wonderful it is to see everyone. And it's nice to actually be able to do that instead of like speaking into the void. So I hope we get a sort of a chat to, I hope we get a sort of a chance to socialize a bit afterwards. And of course that you all come to the audience too very soon, because now that the works are on view, please see them because they're extraordinary. And so I am very excited to kick off the presentations with our first work, Candida Alvarez's painting Mary in the Sky with Diamonds from 2005. Candida Alvarez is a key figure in Chicago contemporary art, both through her artistic practice and her career as an educator at the School of the Art Institute, where she has taught since 1998 and as such has impacted multiple generations of artists. Alvarez's approach to abstract painting is constituted through a layering and overlapping of images, often sourced from personal experiences and found photographs. At its core, her work is an ongoing inquiry into the tension field between abstraction and representation, using composition and color as formal strategies to evoke fragmented images. Indeed, as the artist has said herself, she creates works that are made up of bits and pieces of life itself. We now have an exceptional opportunity to consider this early key work from 2005, which the artist has intentionally kept in her own collection. I say a key work because Mary in the Sky with Diamonds represents a turning point in Alvarez's career, moving away from figuration towards an understanding of the image within a fully abstract vocabulary. Alvarez started painting Mary in the Sky with Diamonds in 2004 as this image of a fruit stall in the eating out section of the New York Times grabbed her attention. On the right, you see a line drawing that Alvarez made, the first one to start the interior composition of the painting. Alvarez merged this image with a number of so-called memory drawings. In this case, kind of diaristic abstractions of her time in Ireland, where she was a visiting scholar at the Curran College of Art from 2004 until 2006. In a recent conversation, Alvarez has said, and I quote, "I can still recall vividly the numerous stacked stone walls, the deep greens of the landscape, lavender flowers, wishing wells, fairy trees, buildings, soft moss, and the smell of the sea," end quote. It is indeed through the form and the color of these drawings that we can start to channel Alvarez's sensorial experiences and observations. The drawings based on the newspaper clipping and her time in Ireland form the compositional blocks of the work. However, whereas the drawings are the roadmap, the sparkling colors are Alvarez's navigational tools. As she has explained, and I quote, "I apply the paint slowly and intuitively through the nooks and crevices of the underlying shape. allowing the drawing to wrestle with the color, and together we can live an experience that at the end you as a viewer can experience as well, end quote. The relationship between the lines that are drawn and from which the landscape of swirling colors and exquisitely detailed forms emerges is both spontaneous and intentional, mirroring her process brushstroke by brushstroke. The name of the work offers another perspective as a reference to Alvarez's mother-in-law, who passed away on November 22nd, 2004. You can see an image of Mary Tobbins here, walking in the streets of Harlem circa 1945. Mary in the Sky with Diamonds is painted in the memory of her, who was buried with one of her favorite bracelets with shiny faux diamonds. The work is an invitation to understand the act of looking through the lens of memory, while insisting on the meaning of being present in the everyday. The work was included in two major exhibitions of Alvarez's work in Chicago, at the Hyde Park Art Center in 2012 and the Chicago Cultural Center in 2017, once again affirming the incredible importance of this work within the artist practice. Mary in the Sky with Diamonds is absolutely foundational for Alvarez's expansive approach to the representative and compositional aspect of abstraction, as we can see so clearly in these images of her recent exhibition at Pony Loche. But I think the work's greatest quality is the time that we can spend with it, to look at the work again and again, each time seeing a different landscape as sort of the memory of having seen it informs the next encounter. Thank you so much. I will now move on also to the second presentation, and excited about that, to talk about Turquoise and Tyson's work, Presence Takes Courage for a Body to Get Down There, a recent work from 2020. Born in Chicago and currently based in New York, Turquoise Dyson approaches the various media she uses in her practice as an allegorical space, centered on a deconstruction of the natural and built environment. In that, she considers how we negotiate and negate various types of systems and spatial orders. Water and liquidity are recurrent themes in her work. The artist employs them both as material and a sort of metaphor to speak about environmental justice in the Anthropocene, the history of the transatlantic slave trade and its impact on the national imaginary of the United States, and lastly, the reality of migration routes across water, particularly in the aftermath of the Syrian refugee crisis. As you can tell from this short introduction, the artist's work sort of evokes an expansive worldview, both in its historical and political preferences, and the way in which it sort of encapsulates a wide range of fields, from art and architecture to history and geography. As such, Presence Takes Courage for a Body to Get Down There epitomizes what is at stake in the artist's material and discursive approach. Now, before returning to the work, I'd like to take a moment to discuss Tyson's recent exhibition at the Graham Foundation in Chicago, named after her project, the Winter Wells Drawing School for Environmental Liberation, as a reference to the Jamaican writer and theorist Sylvia Wynter and American civil rights activist Ida B. Wells. In addition to presenting the sort of artist's recent work, the show functioned like a kind of experimental school, one that asked participants to reconsider, and I quote, the things the mind already knows, borrowed from Jasper Johns. In various talks, workshops, and performances, experts from various fields invited viewers in a collective investigation of how we use, move through, and approach space. On the one hand, as a physical structure that we all inhabit, and on the other hand, as a not yet imagined, I dare say speculative, architecture of collectivity. I highlight this exhibition not only because I think this artist approach is profoundly ideological, but also because I want you to look at this work thinking about space. Indeed, to follow the composition of the lines, the washes of the paint, the shades of black and green as an architecture of thought. Now, in order to understand how this enters into the materiality of her work, we need to take a closer look at the process of making presence takes courage for a body to get down there. Dyson continuously moves the canvas from the wall to the floor and back again, using gravity to let the blue and green washes kind of take over the surface and compose the initial geometry of the work. Black exists as the darker shades of other colors, as well as a form in and of itself. Now, moving from physics to the haptic, the artist creates the lines, which you can see in the next slide in a minute as well, to create a field across the surface. From there, it is back and forth, movements between the liquid composition and construction. As the artist has said, and as you can see in the views that give you a more close-up version of the work, and I quote, this for me is black compositional thought. It is a slow rhythm, a skill of movement in painting that set me up for improvisation and intuition. I make a mark, and sometimes it takes days for me to make another. I know I'm at the point where I'm building my way to see all the ancestors and the future. Yellow shows up, blue shows up. It comes to my mind and I add it to the work, end quote. As we enter that space of black compositional thought, the name jumps out. Presence takes courage for a body to get down there. This needs to be understood in the context of the transatlantic slave trade and the contemporary migration routes on the Mediterranean Sea of asylum seekers moving across water from the Middle East and North Africa to Europe. Dyson wrote, and I quote, "My thoughts are with those ancestors in regarding this forced movement and its scale as indelibly linked to environmental liberation. At the register of ongoing catastrophe, choosing death or a transition for a liberation is indeed courageous," end quote. Pardon me. Theatrical silence can happen here too. Expansive in its conceptual range and profoundly rich in its material composition, this extraordinary work invites an act of deep looking as a kind of meditation on the world we live in, anchored in the artist's radical approach to abstraction and space. Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Robin.
Thank you, Hendrik, and good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled to speak with you tonight about Tony Lewis and his exceptional drawing, Equal, from 2021. Since moving to Chicago to pursue his MFA at the School of the Art Institute in 2009, Tony Lewis has become a crucial figure in Chicago's contemporary art landscape. In addition to advising and lecturing at SAIC, Lewis co-directs venerable artist-run spaces, Julius Caesar and Bill's Auto, highlighting the artist's commitment to fostering emerging voices alongside national and international artists in the city. In his studio practice, Lewis focuses on the convergence of language, abstraction, and drawing. For more than a decade, the artist has employed graphite as the conceptual and material foundation for his distinct visual language that addresses communication, structures of power, and issues of race. Lewis pursues a variety of techniques to make wall and floor-based work that stem from the intersection of his writing practice, selected texts from his personal history, and a desire to expand the boundaries of drawing beyond the categories associations of being passive, subordinate, and preparatory. And here are a few examples on screen. Equal emerges from such philosophical and physical investigations. The work is part of an ongoing series of large-scale based drawings that Lewis has produced over the past 10 years. This body of work, often composed of a sequence of letters or words, utilizes an epigrammic sentence for devising poetic alterations. The graphite and colored pencil that Lewis uses to methodically render the letters' forms disperse across the grid over hand-drawn lines and smudges, producing an expanse of marks that lacks formal structure and demonstrates its own inevitable limitations. Here we see the work installed at the Art Institute. And although this image appears maybe a little washed out compared to the others, or if you've seen it in person, it demonstrates the changing dynamic and transformative qualities of the graphite surface as it cuts across the picture plane and responds to varying sources of light. These particular drawings originate from 4 tracts of blank heavy paper that have been seamed together with tape and liquid adhesive. Spanning 7 by 5 feet, the conjoined quadrants form a grid that creates a graphed spatial dynamic for the artist to lay out his visual content. Letters and punctuation marks are pulled from the sentence template and articulated in graphite or colored pencil to assign new meanings that may be recognizable and concrete as literal words, while others might appear nonsensical or abstract. A free-handed line connects the colorful sans serif characters as another formal element to unify and underscore linguistic structure, however opaque. On screen, you see the evolution of this series with an early work from 2011 on the left and of course Equal on the right. Speaking about his process with this series, Lewis has said, quote, "In the drawings, there's a real place to play and fields where I can run my arms across the paper without flinching, a real space to carry all of the conceptual weight of whatever language, mark, or process, and whatever authority or lack the drawings might have, hinges on this space to breathe and see nothing with or next to everything," end quote. Most of the compositions in this series have been made from traditional dry materials associated with the practice of drawing. Pencil, pulverized graphite, and paper serve as the foundation for works in grayscale and in color. Lewis continues to use various forms of graphite, though much of the built surface relies on the enclosed environment of his studio to shuffle the friable powdered versions across the paper ground. Works are first composed on the wall, as you see here in an early stage of Equal to the left, and then moved to the studio floor to marinate for blocks of time, as you see in the image on the right, only to be returned for evaluation to the wall and then back again until the process is complete. In this series, as with Lewis's larger drawing practice, much of the immediately visible content uses and then breaks a linguistic structure, reducing written language to abstraction through erasure, redaction, and obfuscation. Equal is a pivotal example from this body of work as it exhibits a more open embrace of abstraction and shifts the expectations of such drawings that incorporate words or written expressions to the formal and intuitive possibilities allowed by the artist's language-based architecture, even if redacted. To make this work, Lewis divided the compositional plane with poured graphite, a detail of which you see here, creating a gestural rupture that points to inequities across both people and color, the 2 nouns that he's used in this work. Using the studio to confine the all-over fugitive nature of powdered graphite, Lewis suggests that dust is always settling and that the personal, political, and pop cultural and racial meanings in his work are never really fixed. To quote Lewis again, "It is difficult for objects, materials, and drawings to be completely autonomous and not contaminate each other. This is what happened to me when pounds of graphite dust became an integral part of the study. When I started this kind of research, I created a kind of conflict between the cleanliness, safety, and legitimacy of the mark and the strains. I found fertile ground for work in the constant oscillation over time, in the accumulation of residues, and in the game of improvisation," end quote. Tony Lewis has established himself as an essential voice in contemporary art in Chicago and also on a global scale, forming a distinct visual language and a vocabulary that integrates poetry and text with properties of abstraction and conceptual art legacies. With Equal, we have a stunning example from Lewis's foundational series that has guided and continues to influence the artist's evolving engagement with his chosen medium. But it's also important to note that this work signals a close to this body of work and a unique chance to engage the artist at this moment in his career. Thank you, and now I'll turn it over to Jordan.
Thank you, Robin, and hello, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to present to you this evening on Julia Phillips' Mediator from 2020. Born in Hamburg in 1985, Julia Phillips is a new and essential voice in Chicago contemporary art, joining the University of Chicago as assistant professor in the Department of Visual Arts in 2018. Working primarily with ceramics and metal, Phillips creates sculptures evocative of functional objects, tools or instruments that approximate and provoke engagement with social, psychological, and institutional dynamics. Her sculptures and installations incorporate casts from her own body, limbs, orifices, handprints, and other corporeal traces, implying presence through absence. Indeed, the body is never depicted in full. Through this approach, her sculptures function as mise-en-scène, implicating the viewer and their imagination into unfolding dramas suggested by their titles and forms. For example, Extruder, as seen on the left, installed in the artist's 2018 solo exhibition at MoMA PS1, and on the right, Operator 1 with Blinder, Muter, Penetrator, Aborter, featured in the 10th Berlin Biennial that same year. Phillips reflects, quote, because the functionality of an object serves as a metaphor and a play with imagination, I think of the tools and apparatus as being in a passive state. They are non-activated devices, almost like domestic tools hanging in a broom closet. The fragility of ceramics also negates actual use. However, as demonstrated by Mediator, they are enacted by the physical presence and imagination of the viewer, which sets their situational dynamics in motion. Mediator is a pivotal work in Phillips' oeuvre, as it represents a critical shift from works that implied antagonistic or victimizing roles, exemplified in earlier titles such as Exoticizer and Objectifier, to works that address charged situations that individuals enter into willingly, such as negotiation and mediation. Mediator is composed of two ceramic casts of a human torso that are connected by a stainless steel armature with a central cast of microphone mesh, together staging the performance and precarious promise of mediation. Human scaled with breastplates tilted inwards towards one another, the work sets into place a mechanics and ergonomics of mutual address and facilitation. It is important to the artist that colors of the cast in this work register a spectrum rather than appear as simply black and white. The work's subtle gradations in skin tone are thus suggestive of a nuanced understanding of race relations, and so alludes to how skin tone within and across racial lines can not only affect daily social interactions and catalyze microaggressions, but also impede access to opportunity and advancement within institutional structures. The multicolored, speckled, fleshy glazes raise not only issues of racism, but also colorism and implicit bias. Moreover, they personify the insidious ways in which these intangible transgressions are held and carried in the body and psyche, especially in institutional spaces. The sculpture's Black granite base evokes the architectural foundations often associated with cultural institutions, such as museums and universities, and demarcates, as the work's title suggests, a space of third-party facilitation or conflict resolution. The 9-foot diameter base choreographs the viewer's movement as the body navigates its circumference, embodying the circular and indeterminate act of mediation. In the artist's words, quote, part of my desire is to give the psyche a visual nonverbal language and a voice that can be heard by a broad range of audiences. Mediator debuted in the artist's 2020 solo exhibition titled New Album at Matthew Marks Gallery in New York, where it was accompanied by sculptures including Negotiator 1, a work that similarly functions as a stage for the performance of reconciliation. Here, both works also reflect Phillips' own unique lived experience as a German Black woman existing and advocating within institutional structures in the United States and Europe. In so doing, these sculptures bridge individual adversity with collective calls for equity, inclusion, and belonging. These moral and institutional aspirations and negotiations are transfigured into sculptural forms that address how such problems burrow beneath the skin as flesh tone glazes give way to metal armatures and marble and granite bases. Regulated voluntary processes such as mediation have become hallmarks of universities and museums in the wake of the 2020 reckoning with anti-Black racism and institutional inequity. However, as the fragmented and fragile forms, cinched and fastened by nylon and metal hardware suggest, the body and psyche become sites in which institutional and emotional labor precariously intertwine towards measurable change. As Phillips observes, truth in the context of language and emotion does not exist as an objective fact, but instead is dependent on subjective perspectives of an event. We can see in the work's current installation in our Gallery 289 that Phillips' visual language yields an insightful dialogue with works by artists such as Njideka Crosby on the left and Theaster Gates on the right, critically engaging the complex ways in which race and identity are enacted, claimed, and repossessed by and within institutional structures. Mediator is not only a pivotal work in Phillips' of, but it is also an urgent work that bears witness to the messy interrelations of desire and violence, vulnerability and manipulation, trust and transgression. It powerfully signals, through its materiality and stagecraft, the institutional contact zones in which our individual subjectivities collide towards change. Thank you, and now I will pass it back to Robin.
Thank you, Jordan. And it's now my pleasure to present our final work of the evening, Afterward Via Fantasia by Catherine Sullivan in collaboration with George Lewis and Sean Griffin. For nearly 2 decades, Catherine Sullivan has worked across genres of creative practice and academic discourse, playing an integral role as Associate Professor of Visual Arts at the University of Chicago and within the city's contemporary and performing arts communities. As you may recall from her engaging lecture for the SCA in January 2020, Catherine Sullivan's video installations and theatrical works produce highly aestheticized worlds in which she and her collaborators explore the psychic and material qualities of behavior, time, and place. Drawing from written texts, choreographic regimes, and historical legacies, Sullivan's distinct approach subverts the rules of narrative structure and authorial voice. A former actor herself, Sullivan keenly layers varying elements of stagecraft to create immersive compositions that break the pacificity of viewership and encourage a deeper examination of the performance itself. Afterward Via Fantasia is an acclaimed film that exemplifies Sullivan's approach to collaborative production. It was created with musician, composer, and musicologist George Lewis and composer Sean Griffin in conjunction with Lewis's opera Afterward, an opera directed by Griffin and Sullivan as well. Both works premiered in 2015 alongside the exhibition The Freedom Principle at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. Here we see an installation view from the exhibition of the film on the left and of the opera on the right. The film and opera are both based on Lewis's book from 2008, A Power Stronger Than Itself, and both works, seen here, chronicle the artistic and political community of the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, or AACM, of which Lewis is also a member. Known for improvised and notated music, the still pioneering collective of musicians and composers was founded on Chicago's South Side in 1965. Simultaneously, an historical and conceptual project, Afterward Via Fantasia presents a deeply moving portrait of our city's cultural history. Filmed outside the location of the AACM's first meetings on 4 sets of unrelated Chicago theatrical productions, the work imagines a set of possibilities for the staging of an opera about this group. The stages for Porgy and Bess, 2 Trains Running, Waiting for Godot, and Stop Reset are used as ready-made environments with themes and chronologies that both parallel and diverge from the evolution of the legendary collective. Sullivan has described these contexts as, quote, speculative atmospheres for a discursive film about creative mobility, the AACM's contribution to musical form, genre and political expression, and the contested histories of the avant-garde, especially in terms of class and race, end quote. Shot in color high definition video and discontinued black and white 16mm film, Sullivan's feature-length work spans 97 minutes, but was conceived to create varying durations of viewing with a sequence of tightly composed vignettes. So in the galleries, for example, one could come in and see a 10-minute vignette and really get a sense of the film. These scenes combine choreography Sullivan created for Lewis's opera, readings from his books, scenes from his libretto, musical and theatrical improvisations in response to the scenographies, and a music lesson by Ann Ward, then head of the AACM school. The soundtrack is scored with recordings of Lewis's music for the opera and original music by Sean Griffin. The notion of ensemble, a group viewed as a whole rather than individually, is a central tenet to the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians and their mission. Sullivan has said that her true medium is the ensemble itself, and these generative modes of radical collaboration are reflected in the stratum of players and theatrical conventions behind this production. And as listed on the poster you see to your right, which Sullivan designed specifically for inclusion within the installation, so everyone is present within the space. The cast features current AACM members, including Douglas R. Ewart, who is pictured in the left still playing, as well as artist Pope L, who we will see in a moment, and dozens of actors, dancers, and vocalists based here in Chicago. In this way, the film operates in the same spirit of artistic promiscuity and decentralized authorship that is essential to both Lewis's opera and the ethos of the AACM. Like the book and the libretto, Afterward Via Fantasia recounts the contributions of the association, but it also raises questions about Black artists rewriting themselves into the history of the avant-garde that they had previously been excluded from. There's a particular excerpt in the film that speaks to this strategy. And although I hope you all have watched the work by now, either at home or at the museum, I think it will be particularly powerful for us to view this clip together. And I believe a link will also be available for the full film in the chat.
Part of my task in this book, as I see it, is to bring to the surface the strategies that have been developed to discursively disconnect African-American artists from any notion of experimentalism or the avant-garde. The histories and analyses that I recount here are meant to shepherd young African-American artists through the convolutions and contortions that were needed to construct this ethnically cleansed discourse, to encourage young African-American artists to see themselves as being able to claim multiple histories of experimentalism despite the histories of erasure, both willful and unwitting.
Speaking about the title of the work, Sullivan has said, quote, "Fantasias are mixed forms that depart and adhere to structure, and the film is only a part of the multiverse George Lewis shapes from the polyphony of quoted voices in the book and in the opera." Indeed, Sullivan has crafted a film with Lewis and Griffin that freeforms the composer's words and AACM's history. It shifts the scenographic atmospheres into otherworldly spaces that simultaneously celebrate and question the place of Black creativity in history. And this illuminates the continued relevance and importance of the Association for Advancement of Creative Musicians on a local and global level, making this truly extraordinary opportunity to consider this work that is not only made in, but about Chicago for acquisition this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Hendrik, Jordan, and Robin for these wonderful and dynamic presentations. I would encourage all of you, if you have any questions, to now enter them into the chat room. I have one question that I'm going to address right now, but please take the time to write your questions so that we can answer them and engage. And the first question is from Anastasia Tanari for Robin and Hendrik. I am curious for both Tony Lewis and Torquaze Dyson's work, where these works would fit within the AIC collection and whether the installation, Lewis, or performance, creating space, Dyson, aspects of their practices are of interest to the curatorial team as well.
Robin, do you want to go first or shall I?
Sure, certainly can. I'll say that both Dyson and Lewis's work are installed in the galleries right now, and they are in a gallery with Candida Alvarez's painting, as well as a painting in the collection by Caroline Kent. So just to give everybody sort of a sense of where they currently are hung. And as I mentioned towards the close of my presentation, Tony Lewis's work engages with abstraction, but also conceptual art legacies. So his use of language and the grid is very much, in conversation with the vast holdings we have across minimal and conceptual art histories. So, from from Barbara Kruger to Glenn Ligon, and he's cited Lawrence Weiner as an influence as well. So I think you both have the conversation with those artists, but then, of course, when you look at it from the centuries of history at the museum, I mean, graphite alone is the elemental tool that most makers have made. And so I think there's this grander conversation, of course, that for me is what's so moving about his work and how it's so experimental with the medium, and how that's in conversation throughout almost every department in the museum. But specifically, I think within the 20th century collection that we have, and especially with the conceptual artists I mentioned, is how I would situate his work. And I, for one, am very much in favor of this work coming into the collection as well as Dyson. So I'll hand it over to
Thanks. I mean, you've done such a great job of there, sort of like laying the field. I mean, the wonderful thing about the SCA kind of exhibition being sort of installed at the Art Institute again, which truly makes me so happy, is that you can take a walk, and you can start with Ed Clark, and then you go to Jack Whitten, and then you cross a little bit and you go see things like Glenn Ligon. And there's a beautiful sort of a conversation at the moment happening, I think, on the second floor, and sort of expanding into various kind of like sort of other parts. But the second floor is what we have also focused on in the last months, that I think will sort of allow you to like sort of answer your own like a question through these names and through these legacies of artists that both these sort of artists build on so much within a history of, let's say, Black abstraction for sure, but also within history of let's say, formulated avant-garde this thinking about what sort of abstraction means and what it can sort of hold and like represent within and sort of like beyond its like formality. And I know that that's a big thing to say, but I'm just excited about seeing these works sort of on our walls again. And I hope, yeah, you can all take that walk with me soon.
And Hendrik, can you tell us how long the works are going to be up at the Art Institute?
It is, we don't have a final date yet. We're thinking kind of early fall, something like that. But we will let you know, of course, but you'll have the whole summer. So that's great to start with, I think.
Okay, I have another question from David Salkin. How does Torkaze Dyson paintings sit in her larger body of work? How does this particular painting sit in her larger body of work?
Well, I think, if you look at her work of the last like 3-4 years, it has entered a whole new kind of like universe almost. And I think she's found a way, or I know she's found a way, because that's why I'm so like sort of excited about this work, to sort of coalesce a lot of her thinking about many of the issues that are kind of brought to the fore and that we've seen in like Chicago as well, at like Rona and at like Graham Foundation and kind of all the shows of hers that have been sort of happening in Chicago already, in the most succinct and like material form of like abstraction. And like, I want to circle back in that sense to like sort of the water and sort of the liquidity as, again, and I really meant what I'm saying, as sort of a material in her work that becomes sort of a metaphor for this sort of architecture of thought, right? That sort of speaks to history and the future at the same time. So I really like respect how in this work, but also in kind of the body of work that it is part of the last sort of like 1.5 years, she has focused sort of all that thought into what sort of abstraction can mean to her. And that's why I think we're looking at sort of a key work that sort of has its like sort of peers. I mean, that's what sort of a great artist is when she's kind of at that peak, and who knows what the next peak will be for her. But I think, yeah, this is a really sort of incredibly sort of important work because it like materializes all these concepts. David, I hope that answers the question a little bit. So feel free to follow up if not.
Okay, thank you. Okay, maybe you could ask on Anna. Okay, we're asking about 3 works. How do the other works like Candida Alvarez, Julia Phillips, and Catherine Sullivan fit into our collection going forward? And that can be out to any of you, one at a time.
Sure, I guess I'll start. with Julia, I think you can see in its current installation, as I sort of spoke to briefly, how it already is in dialogue with artists such as Njideka Crosby, the Gates, and many others who are really thinking about the complex sort of interrelations of sort of race and sort of institutions and how it operates on often very nuanced levels. At the same time, I think that Julia really does sort of mine sort of histories and strategies of conceptual art and institutional critique, really thinking about the architecture of the apparatus and how to sort of integrate this with bodily forms in order to sort of articulate sort of the psychic relations that unfold in these spaces. Some artists that also come to mind, just thinking off the top of my head here in this situation, are artists like Robert Gober, who are sort of looking at bodily fragments and sort of, you know, these sort of perverse, almost perverse minimalism, and sort of thinking about sort of bodily relations on that level. As well as even artists such as Cameron Rowland and Park MacArthur, who are younger artists, similarly sort of using conceptual strategies to sort of give sort of material hardware a sense of desire and violence, and articulate sort of these different emotional, psychological, and institutional resonances.
Hendrik, can you speak to Candida Alvarez?
I was busy answering a question. Can I hear the
Okay.
a question again, please?
It was how do these artists' work fit into the collection? And we heard about Tony Lewis, and I'm asking you about Candida Alvarez, and then we can go on to Catherine Sullivan as well.
There's multiple ways to answer that question. I mean, again, within kind of a larger field of like sort of North American abstraction, there are like relationships to be made, especially because her like sort of composition is so like complex. You can go sort of in a direction of more like seriality towards like sort of Alma Thomas, or a more sort of kind of like free form of sort of abstraction. But I really also like to think about her work through sort of the artists that she has like impacted, with like Lewis being one of them, for instance, you know, and so many other sort of artists that we have seen in Chicago. And I think Monique emphasized that as well, which I really like support, like to kind of
but I want my. Why am I on mute? Why can't I hear it?
Whoever that was, but yeah, so like these two ways, sort of art historically, but also relationally, really. And that's why this has been such sort of an extraordinary year, because we also have 5 artists who, if I'm not like mistaken, all know each other, and in very sort of like different ways. So it gives a really great sort of cross section of our community here, and I think that's amazing.
Just to add on to that, in speaking about Catherine Sullivan, and I think Hendrik really kind of put a lovely point on what he was saying, and that actually all the artists, they do know each other. They, you know, either work together, or they've collaborated together, or they've been in school together, etc. So it's a really wonderful thing. And I'll just use that as the starting off point to talk about Catherine Sullivan, and that, you know, her work, you know, it has so many layers that it actually is interwoven within many periods and makers within our collection. So, I mean, thinking about artists that were, you know, recording and making during that time of the late 60s, early 70s, you know, Nelson Stevens in the collection, but then thinking about work that's more contemporary or within the time-based media realms, you know, collaboration and music with Ragnar Kняrston, and or Rodney McMillian and his work looking sort of at, you know, American race issues, and also dealing with, you know, revising texts for performance, or even Colleen Smith, who actually, you know, recorded performance on video. And so sort of all these improvisational ways of dealing with histories, but imagined histories, make Catherine's work really well situated within our time-based media. But I also want to again say that she has these this work has a lot to do with other, non-media based works in the collection. And I think Pope L's presence in the video alone, given his legacy and relationship at the Art Institute, is also something that is important to note.
And I might just add one quick thing about Julia, as you guys have gotten me thinking here, is just the medium and materiality. I think that in terms of recent acquisitions for the museum, she also speaks to sort of a more radical and expanded use of ceramics, sort of conceptual and critical means, as we can see in works by Liz Larner, as well as Simone Lee. So I just wanted to add sort of that aspect of materiality and medium.
Shall we have a drink?
I know. Questions?
Any more questions, Jackie?
No, sorry, I had it on mute. I apologize. Was trying to be respectful so that I'm not making noise. Last question of the evening, but you can also send emails throughout the week. David Salkin, Dirk Dennison, and the Hollands asked, who do you feel is at their peak to all the curators?
I kind of answered that question a little bit in the chat, so maybe it's okay to leave it at that. But if you have any other things, like follow up on things that come to mind as you sort of like think about your vote, then yeah, please send them by email, because we're happy to look at them. And yeah, as you make up your minds, which is a crucial aspect of this all, of course.
Try to visit the museum if you haven't already. The work looks amazing within our galleries.
We can talk all evening, but it's no comparison to seeing the works in person. So if you haven't gone, we strongly encourage you to go. Thank you.
It really was a big effort, and I applaud the curators for working it out to have our work hung in the museum this year. So I applaud you all for all the hard work it took to get it there. So please, please, all the members go and see the work. We're running out of time and we must move on. The curators will do their best to answer remaining questions by email over the several days before the vote. Votes are due by the end of the day, Sunday, June 20th. The end of the day, Sunday, June 20th. The results will be announced the week of June 21st. For now, I'm going to welcome back our president, David Egelin, to present the board slate and some concluding remarks. Thanks, and on to David.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you to the curators for those very enlightening presentations. Fantastic. So before we move on to the slate of officers for next year, I wanted to thank our entire board for all their dedication and efforts on behalf of the SCA, working on our programming, acquisitions, member events, benefit, and many other initiatives. They're just a fantastic group of individuals. I also wanted to let all of you know that the board recently completed a workshop on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are working toward making the SCA more welcoming and accessible to a wide range of contemporary art enthusiasts and joining the Art Institute in their efforts towards a more equitable future. Normally, our nominating and bylaws chair, Stephanie Skestos Gabriel, would present our slate of officers and board of directors for next year. But in the interest of moving things along quickly, I will be presenting the slate right now. Our slate of officers for the coming year is myself, David Egelin for president, Jessica Diamond for vice president, Linda Usher for treasurer, and Fenton Booth for secretary. The remaining directors are shown on the screen here. I also want to take this opportunity to thank Betty Harris, who is stepping off the board after 12 years as a dedicated board member in the organization. Even though we'll miss Betty's lively insights and keen knowledge of contemporary art, we know that we'll continue to see her and Eddie at many of our upcoming programs, and they will always remain part of the SCA community. All participants were emailed the link for this year's ballot earlier today. You can also access the ballot by typing in the link on the screen or scanning the QR code with your smartphone's camera. When filling out your ballots, please remember number 1 is your top choice and number 5 is your bottom choice. All ballots must be completed with 1 through 5 ranking for our voting system to work. When ballots are being completed, you will also be asked whether you require a full or a half ballot. For those members who share an SCA membership, for example, with a partner or a spouse, you will both have the option of voting by submitting a half vote for each of your shared membership. You will also be asked whether you approve or oppose the 2021-22 board slate. As we wrap up this evening, I want to thank Ann Goldstein, Hendrik Folkerts, Jordan Carter, Robin Farrell, and Caitlin Haskell for their partnership and collaboration. The entire SCA board feels very fortunate to be able to work with these incredible professionals on our various initiatives, from programming to acquisition to member events throughout the year. I also want to thank the entire ModCon staff, many joining us tonight, for your tremendous contributions in maintaining the tradition of installing the SCA's annual exhibition in the Modern Wing this year. We are thrilled to be able to share these incredible artworks, not only with SCA members, but with a broader audience visiting the museum throughout the summer. I also want to thank our SCA staff, Jennifer Cordoloni and Jennifer Moon, for all their outstanding work. We are blessed to have these two amazing individuals working on so many different aspects of the SCA, and we wouldn't be the organization that we are today without both of them. We look forward to communicating the results of tonight's vote next week, so be on the lookout for an email from us announcing the SCA's 21 acquisition winners. So in closing, remember that you'll be continuing to hear from us throughout the summer with more programming news via email and social media, as well as a members bulletin in August. Thank you again for being a member and supporter of the SCA. We appreciate your support and engagement and are looking forward to an exciting future ahead. Again, we encourage you to unmute yourselves, turn on your camera, grab a drink, and enjoy the breakout rooms with the fellow SCA members for a few minutes, which will start right now. Thank you and good night.